So, I need to talk to you today about something very, very important that has to do with communism, capitalism, life as we know it. And during this pandemic, I can think of nothing more important to talk to you about than the Lada Riva, which was produced from 1980 until 2015. Yes, I said 2015. But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Sunday. I hope you're chilling at home with the family and everyone's staying safe. And let's hope we can get a bit more entertainment. And by that I mean you, Tavares, Hoovy's Garage, the Grand Tour, Jeremy Clarkson. God damn it, when is our second episode coming? Because right now someone is actually watching this when they could be watching you, and that's what you're doing to the world. Someone is actually watching this. It's awful. So the Lada Riva started its life as the Vaz in Russia in 1970. And it wasn't called the Lada Riva at the time, and in fact in Germany it was never called the Lada Riva. It was made by a company called Autovaz, and I believe it was the Vaz 2105 through to the 2107 as the production years and different specs went on. So this company changed over time into Lada. But what they did originally was Autovaz took a 1966 Fiat 124, which was a great car. I don't care what you say, it was a fantastic car. However, they took this and they decided to make it worse. So essentially what they did was they took the car back to Russia, started importing them, and then they put heavier steel on it for the Russian winters. And on top of that, they decided to change a few different things, like change the engine out for a worse one, change the transmission out for a worse one. Just made it worse, really. But these things were super simple and easy to fix because it was a 1960s technology, essentially. Because they didn't change too much from the Fiat 124, which would be great, but it was a 1966 Fiat, and Fiat up until recently weren't that reliable, so you can imagine how that goes. And then you put it into a Russian factory, and then you know, it's just not a great idea. However, if you were born in England and you lived there around the 80s, you would have noticed a lot of these things, because they produced and sold them in Europe until 1988. So there was a flood of these things in Britain. So after the modified licensed version of the Fiat 124 from 1970 to 1979, they decided they wanted to make a whole new Lada and build it themselves. So what they did was they took pretty much every part from that original Lada, the Fiat 124 basically, and designed something that looked exactly the same almost, with some slightly different headlights and more Russian parts, which means worse quality, especially because this was from 1980 till 1988. And as you can imagine, the quality of things during that time, as the wall and as the Soviet Union was starting to collapse, it wasn't brilliant. So between 1980 and 1988, they started exporting these to Western Europe and mainly Britain. And weirdly enough, the British bought a lot of them. 30,000 of them were sold in that 8 years, which is not a lot by comparison to car makers like Volkswagen and whatnot. But that is a lot of cars to be sold in such a small island by a Russian company during the Cold War. It's strange. And I think the reason for that is because it performed like a British person, by which I mean slow, not quite vigorously, not exciting, but it got you there. And I meant sexually, by the way. John Oliver, I'm talking to you. This thing had a top speed of 84 miles an hour, mind-blowing, and will get from 0 to 60 in 16.9 seconds. Now, if you buy one today, don't expect that to actually get to 60, because if it had a top speed of 84 miles an hour when it was released in 1980, it's probably lost a few of those horses today. So don't expect to be cruising around at 60 miles an hour in your Russian shitbox. The transmissions were awful, the gearboxes broke all the time, but Russians in England love these. So there was a lot of Russian population living in England, and they loved them. The reason people love these is a lot like why I loved my Fiat Punto that I had. It was a 2000, was because basically if something went wrong, it was easy to fix. And if you saw the video about my Chevrolet 87, I loved it for that reason too. And it broke down, I could get a screwdriver and I could fix it and get it going on the road again. And that's why people loved these Ladas. Now, what interestingly happened in 1989 and onwards when these things stopped influxing into Britain because the Soviet Union had collapsed, people in Russia really, really wanted to get their hands on these. So people were selling these cars for roughly £800-900 in England at the time, in the early 90s, like late to mid 90s. But all of a sudden you started to be able to sell your Lada for around £2,000. And the person who was doing this was sending it back to Russia, and people were buying them for around £4,000. And the reason for this was no new parts were being created, everything was falling apart in the Soviet Union, and Russian mobs were basically taking everyone's money. So people wanted a car that they could just fix themselves without an issue. And that, for the Russians, was the Lada, because they knew how to fix it, they could probably build the parts in their own back garden, and all of a sudden they exported basically all of these Ladas back to Russia over the course of 5 or 6 years. And there's a lot of Russian people coming in every day and shipping these things back. One guy in an interview, I believe, with Quinton from Old Top Gear, said that he was shipping about 60 of these a month at one point, which was making him a profit of around £120,000 in the early 90s in Britain, and bringing that to Russia where everything was cheap. So that's pretty cool. And also, if you want to learn more about how bad Russia was at the time, there's a few documentaries on Netflix, one of which is about a guy trying to buy a Russian nuclear sub, and by trying I mean did, and then got caught. But it's a hilarious story and you should definitely watch it. So Lada is now owned by the Renault Group, and they're producing different cars in Russia and Egypt and different places around the world. And their cars have changed a lot, but actually are still quite boxy. I saw an interview with the factory in 2018, which I'll show you here in a second. And basically what happened is, they're the same cars, just with newer engines. They look like old Ladas, they're just better safety spec, lighter bodywork, because that steel you would beat at for forever and it just wouldn't break, which is again another reason why people love them. But the Renault Group took it over and started using their engines, the same as they did with Dacia in the Ukraine, and started producing these much better engines. And by Ukraine I mean Romania, but you know, let's not go there. So the Renault Group are now making these Ladas popular again, and they're producing them in Egypt and Russia and in Europe in certain places. But don't expect to see a Lada soon. I reckon what they're probably going to do is use these more for the Chinese market, which is more emerging and easier to sell without all that backstory and history. But what is interesting is that what happened after 1988, when the Lada factory in Russia shut down, people still showed up to work. The company went bankrupt and couldn't produce any more cars, or basically it had a shit ton of parts left over from the Soviet Union to build cars, but no money to pay the workers. And these people in these factories were so loyal, and I guess they just had, you know, that communist blood in them, that they continued on making these. And the Lada then kind of had a little bit of a resurgence in Russia, and it was produced in Russia from 1980 to 2010, even though the official time would have been 1980 to 88, and then a breakover from around 93, 94 to 2010. The people kept working in that factory for those 4 or 5 years, and a lot of them worked without pay. So this car was amazing. And would you believe that the last ever Lada Riva, or 1300 GS, or the Autovaz 2105, whatever your favorite mark is for these Ladas, was produced in 2015. Yes, 2015. That is the same year that you could get a Mercedes CLA. So the difference between these two cars is incredible. But it was made in the Suzuki plant in Egypt, and they absolutely love these cars. So that's the Lada Riva. It's just an incredible shitbox of a car, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of want one because it just sounds so awful and terrible and hideous and awful and terrible. But I kind of want one as much as I can. So I'm going to get one at some point in the next year, and we're going to drive it straight into a wall and see what happens. And that's going to be the video where my YouTube views explode. Thank you for watching so much, guys. Tune in tomorrow where I'm going to be talking about the Tucker 48. And if you haven't heard of the Tucker 48 and you can't wait until tomorrow because you've got nothing else to do, and by tomorrow I mean Monday. This is Sunday. Sorry, the days are getting weird. So yeah, I'll be talking about the Tucker 48, and if you don't know anything about that car, definitely look up the Tucker movie with Jeff Bridges from 1988. It is on Netflix and you can watch it today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you guys tomorrow.